My name is Ruby Grace Bradley, Colonel, United States Army Nurse Corps. I was 34 years old when the Japanese Empire tore my world apart and threw me into a hell I never imagined possible. I'm about to tell you how I survived 37 months as a prisoner of war in the Philippines, how I performed secret surgeries in a cramped internment camp, including a cesarean section with makeshift tools while guards patrolled just feet away. How I weighed only 86 pounds when American forces finally liberated us. My body wasted, but my spirit unbroken. How I went on to serve in Korea, became one of the most decorated women in American military history, and learned that courage isn't about being fearless. It's about refusing to quit even when your body is failing and death seems certain. What makes a woman stand when everything tells her to surrender? What drives a nurse to risk execution to save lives? How does someone find strength when starvation has reduced them to skin and bones? Now, let me tell you what really happened. I grew up in Spencer, West Virginia, in the heart of Appalachia, coal country. My father was a farmer. My mother raised 5 children in a house that was more hope than nails. We were poor. Everyone was poor in those hills. But we had something money couldn't buy. We had family, faith, and the belief that hard work could lift you out of poverty. I remember my mother nursing neighbors through the Spanish flu epidemic in 1918. I was 11 years old, watching her move from house to house, fearless, tireless, holding hands of the dying, comforting families who'd lost everything. She never got sick, never complained, just did what needed doing. Ruby, she told me one night, bone tired after losing a patient. The good Lord gave us 2 hands, one to help ourselves, one to help others. Never forget which one matters more. I never did. I knew from that moment what I wanted to be. A nurse. Someone who could ease suffering, save lives, make a difference. But nursing school cost money we didn't have, so I worked. Cleaned houses, took in laundry, saved every penny. Took me 6 years, but in 1923, at age 16, I enrolled in the Phillip Hospital School of Nursing in Barboursville, West Virginia. Nursing school was brutal. 18-hour days, brutal instructors, endless studying. But I loved every minute of it. Learning anatomy, practicing procedures, caring for patients. This was what I was meant to do. This was my calling. I graduated in 1924, top of my class, got a job at a hospital in Ronceverte, West Virginia. Good pay, steady work, helping people. I should have been content, but I wanted more. I wanted adventure, wanted to serve something bigger than myself. In 1934, I joined the Army Nurse Corps. I was 27 years old, ready to see the world, ready to serve my country. The recruiters were skeptical. Women in the military were rare, and I was small, barely 5 feet tall, weighed maybe 110 pounds soaking wet. But I was tough, mountain tough, Appalachian tough. They took me. Basic training at Walter Reed Hospital in Washington, learning military protocol, Army procedures, how to function in the organized chaos of military medicine. I thrived. The discipline, the structure, the sense of purpose. This was home. My first assignment was stateside, various Army hospitals. Then, in 1939, they asked for volunteers to serve overseas, the Philippines. Camp John Hay in Baguio, a mountain resort town on Luzon Island. Paradise assignment, they said. Beautiful weather, light duty, tropical paradise. I volunteered immediately. I arrived in Baguio in 1940. It was paradise. Stunning mountains, cool air at elevation, friendly Filipino people, and a small, close-knit American community. The hospital was modern, well-equipped. My duties were routine, treating soldiers for minor ailments, tropical diseases, the occasional training injury. Nothing dramatic. I made friends quickly. Captain Maud Davison, chief nurse, became my mentor and friend. The doctors were professional, respectful, unusual for that era when many male doctors looked down on nurses. The Filipino staff taught me Tagalog, shared their culture, welcomed me. I wrote letters home every week, told my parents about the mangoes and papayas, the stunning sunsets, the wonderful people. Paradise, I called it. I couldn't have been happier. I had no idea I was living in the calm before the storm. In 1941, tensions with Japan escalated. We heard rumors war might be coming. The military increased readiness, ran drills, stockpiled supplies. But honestly, most of us didn't believe it. We were Americans in an American territory. Who would dare attack us? Then came December 7th, 1941. I was in the hospital when word came through. Pearl Harbor attacked. Hundreds dead, ships sinking, planes destroyed. War. Real war. I remember standing in the corridor, listening to the radio broadcast, feeling my world shift. Everything changed in that moment. Paradise became a battleground. Within hours, Japanese planes hit the Philippines. Clark Field, Nichols Field, our airfields destroyed. Our planes, most of them, wiped out on the ground. We were defenseless. The hospital filled immediately. Wounded soldiers, burned pilots, shocked survivors. We worked around the clock. No sleep, barely time to eat. Blood everywhere. Young men dying despite everything we did. War had found us. Captain Davison gathered us nurses together. Her face was grim. "Ladies," she said quietly, "the Japanese will invade. It's not if, it's when. We're staying. The wounded need us. We're nurses. We don't abandon our patients. Understood?" "Yes, ma'am," we answered as one. I should have been terrified. Maybe I was, but mostly, I felt determined. I was a nurse, an American. My patients needed me. I would stay. I would serve. I would do my duty, whatever came next. The Japanese landed on Luzon on December 22nd, 1941, 15 days after Pearl Harbor. We heard the reports on the radio. Enemy forces coming ashore at multiple points, overwhelming our defenses. The Philippine and American forces were fighting, but they were outnumbered, outgunned, being pushed back. In Baguio, we prepared for the worst. We moved the hospital into more defensible positions, stockpiled medical supplies, prepared evacuation routes that we all knew we'd probably never use. Captain Davison made it clear. We were staying with our patients. Period. Christmas 1941 was the strangest of my life. We tried to maintain some normalcy, sang carols with the patients, shared what little holiday food we had. But the sounds of distant artillery were our background music. War was coming closer. On December 27th, Japanese troops entered Baguio. No fight, no resistance. The town was declared open, undefended. We watched from the hospital windows as enemy soldiers marched through the streets, rising sun flags replacing the stars and stripes. It made me physically sick. An officer arrived at our hospital, spoke decent English, very polite, very formal. "You are now prisoners of the Empire of Japan," he announced. "You will continue your medical duties. You will obey all orders. Any resistance will be punished severely. We had no choice. We nodded, agreed. What else could we do? At first, internment was relatively mild. We continued working at the hospital, treating American and Filipino patients. The Japanese needed medical personnel. They were stretched thin, fighting across the Pacific. So they used us. But slowly, conditions deteriorated. Food rations decreased. Medical supplies dwindled. The Japanese took the best equipment, the best medicines, left us with scraps. Patients suffered. We did what we could with less and less. In July 1942, they moved us. All American civilians and military personnel were being consolidated into internment camps. We were transported to Camp Holmes, just outside Baguio. 500 Americans crammed into a facility designed for maybe 200. Overcrowded, undersupplied, surrounded by barbed wire and guards with rifles. Welcome to prison. Camp Holmes was hell disguised as a camp. Barracks with leaking roofs, wooden bunks with thin mats, communal latrines that barely functioned. Food was rice, sometimes vegetables, rarely meat. Maybe 1,200 calories a day if we were lucky. Starvation rations. But we were nurses. We immediately set up a camp hospital, really just a couple of barracks converted to medical use. We had almost no supplies, no anesthesia, no antibiotics, barely any bandages. We improvised everything. I learned to make surgical tools from scrap metal, learned to sterilize instruments over charcoal fires, learned to use boiled cloth strips as bandages, learned to perform procedures I'd only read about in textbooks, without proper equipment, without backup, without any margin for error. The internees started getting sick. Malnutrition, dysentery, malaria, beriberi. People were dying. Old folks first, then the weak, then anyone whose body just couldn't take it anymore. I worked 20-hour days, moving from patient to patient, doing everything possible with nothing. Holding hands of the dying, comforting families, stealing extra food rations for the sickest patients, hiding medicine from the guards. The Japanese didn't care if we lived or died. We were prisoners, beneath contempt. When we requested medical supplies, they laughed. When patients died, they shrugged. We were on our own. In 1943, they moved us again. Camp John Hay, ironically the same base where I'd first been stationed, but now it was a prison camp. Worse conditions, less food, harsher guards. The Japanese were losing the war by then, though we didn't know it. They were taking their frustrations out on us. I weighed maybe 95 pounds by then. My uniform hung off me like a tent. My hair was falling out from malnutrition. My hands shook constantly. But I kept working, kept fighting, kept saving lives. One night in late 1943, a woman was brought to me. Filipino, married to an American internee. Pregnant. Very pregnant. In labor. Complications. The baby was breech, wasn't coming naturally. She needed a cesarean section. I'd never performed a cesarean. I'd assisted on dozens, but never actually done one myself. And certainly not in a prison camp with no anesthesia, no proper surgical tools, no blood for transfusions if something went wrong. "Please," her husband begged, "you're our only hope. She'll die. The baby will die. Please." I looked at Captain Davison. She looked back at me. We both knew the risks. If the Japanese discovered I was performing surgery, unauthorized, unsupervised. They might execute me. They might execute everyone in the hospital barracks. But this woman would die without help. Her baby would die. That wasn't acceptable. "Bring her into the back room," I said quietly. "Get me clean water, the sharpest knife we have, thread, cloth strips, anything that can work as clamps, and post lookouts. If guards come near, delay them. I need at least an hour." They carried her into a small storage room. We laid her on a wooden table. I had one small lamp, couldn't risk more light attracting attention. Captain Davison would assist. Another nurse would monitor the door. The woman was terrified, in agony, crying softly, trying not to scream and alert the guards. "Listen to me," I told her, gripping her hand. "I'm going to save you and your baby, but you must be silent. No matter how much it hurts, you cannot scream. Do you understand?" She nodded, tears streaming down her face. I had no anesthesia, nothing for pain except a leather strap for her to bite. I'd have to cut into her abdomen while she was fully conscious. I sterilized the knife over a flame, washed my hands as thoroughly as possible, said a prayer. Then I began. I made the first incision. She bit down on the leather, body rigid with pain, but she didn't scream. Blood welled up. I worked quickly, carefully, by inadequate lamplight, feeling my way through layers of tissue, praying I didn't nick something vital. Captain Davison wiped blood away, held tissue back with improvised retractors. Her hands were steady, even though I could see fear in her eyes. I reached the uterus, cut carefully. Saw the baby's feet, definitely breech. I reached in, found the baby, carefully, so carefully, maneuvered it, pulled it free. A boy, not breathing. I handed him to Captain Davison. She cleared his mouth and nose, rubbed his chest vigorously. Nothing. She kept trying. I was closing the uterus, working frantically. The mother was going into shock. Then, a cry. Weak, but a cry. The baby was breathing. I'd never heard a more beautiful sound. I finished closing, layer by layer, stitching with thread we'd salvaged from old uniforms, hoping it would hold, hoping infection wouldn't set in. The mother had passed out from pain and shock. Better that way. The whole procedure took 53 minutes, felt like hours. We cleaned up evidence of the surgery, moved the mother and baby to a regular bunk, made it look like a normal birth. If the guards asked questions, we'd claim she delivered naturally, complications but resolved. They never asked, either didn't care or didn't notice. 3 days later, the mother developed a fever. Infection setting in. No antibiotics. I treated her with everything we had, herbal remedies from Filipino internees, prayer, constant monitoring. Against all odds, the fever broke. She survived. The baby survived. Both lived to see liberation. That surgery haunted me and inspired me. Haunted because I'd performed it under conditions that would horrify any medical professional. Inspired because it proved something. Even in hell, even with nothing, we could still save lives. We could still fight death and win. That became my mission. Stay alive, keep others alive, resist through healing. That was my war. By 1944, we were all slowly dying. That's the truth of it. Starvation, disease, despair, they were killing us as surely as bullets would have, just more slowly, more cruelly. My weight dropped below 90 pounds. I could count every rib, every vertebra. My uniform had been taken away long ago, worn to rags. I wore a dress made from old flour sacks that a Filipino internee had sewn for me. It hung on my skeletal frame like a shroud. But I was still a nurse, still had my duty. The Japanese cut our rations again. We were getting maybe 800 calories a day. Rice with bugs in it, thin vegetable soup, occasionally a tiny piece of dried fish. People were literally starving to death. I started a secret operation. At night, I'd sneak to the camp fence where Filipino civilians would hide packages, food, medicine, sometimes just notes saying they were praying for us. The Japanese had forbidden any contact with locals on pain of death. I didn't care. My patients needed food. I'd risk execution for that. I'd take the packages, distribute them to the sickest internees. A few extra spoonfuls of rice, a piece of fruit, some vegetables. Not enough to cure anyone, but enough to keep them alive one more day, one more week. Captain Davison covered for me. She'd create diversions, distract guards, give me time to move the contraband. We both knew if we were caught, we'd be shot. We did it anyway. One night, a guard almost caught me. I was at the fence receiving a package from a Filipino farmer when I heard footsteps. Japanese patrol. I shoved the package under my dress, pressed against the fence, tried to look like I was just getting air. The guard approached, raised his rifle, shouted in Japanese. I didn't speak much Japanese, but I understood the tone. I was in trouble. I bowed deeply, kept my head down, submissive, apologetic. In broken Japanese, I said I was sick, needed fresh air, meant no harm. He stepped closer. I could smell cigarette smoke on his uniform. He was young, maybe 20. Could have been someone's son back in West Virginia. But he was the enemy, and he had the power of life and death over me. He stared at me for what felt like an eternity. I could feel the package pressing against my ribs. If he searched me, I was dead. Then he laughed, said something in Japanese that I didn't understand, waved his rifle, gesturing for me to return to barracks. I bowed again, walked slowly, calmly, even though every instinct screamed to run. Made it back to the hospital barracks, collapsed on my bunk, shaking so hard I thought I'd come apart. Captain Davison found me. "Ruby, what happened?" I couldn't speak for several minutes. Finally told her. She hugged me. We were both so thin, it was like two skeletons embracing. "No more," she whispered. "Ruby, I can't lose you. No more fence runs." But we both knew I would keep going. People were dying. I had to do something. The diseases got worse. Dysentery swept through the camp. Without proper sanitation, without medicine, it was a death sentence for the weakest internees. I watched people waste away, unable to digest what little food they had, dying from dehydration and malnutrition. I learned to make oral rehydration solution from salt, sugar, and boiled water. Learned to recognize who could be saved and who was too far gone. Learned to comfort the dying, to help them pass with dignity. An old man named Harold Peterson died in my arms in March 1944. Retired teacher from Michigan, always had a kind word for everyone. He wasted to maybe 80 pounds. His last words to me, "Tell them we didn't give up. Tell them Americans don't surrender, even in hell." I promised him I would. Then I held his hand while he slipped away. We buried him in the camp cemetery. No coffin, just wrapped in a thin cloth, laid in a shallow grave. I said a prayer, promised him that America would win this war, would liberate us, would remember. Keeping that promise became my reason to survive. Malaria hit me in May 1944. I'd been treating malaria patients for months, but I'd stayed healthy somehow. Then my luck ran out. The fever hit like a freight train. Chills so violent, I thought my bones would break. Fever so high, I hallucinated, sweating and shaking and delirious. Captain Davison treated me. We had almost no quinine left, but she gave me what we had, fed me by hand when I was too weak to hold a spoon, kept me alive through sheer force of will. I was sick for 2 weeks, lost another 10 pounds I couldn't afford to lose. When I finally recovered enough to work again, I weighed 83 pounds. My hands shook constantly. I was weak as a newborn kitten. But I went back to work. Patients needed me. The other nurses were in similar condition. We were all starving, all sick, all on the edge of collapse. But we kept functioning, kept caring for patients, kept each other going. There was a bond between us that's hard to explain. We'd seen hell together, suffered together, lost patients together, saved lives together. We were more than colleagues, more than friends. We were sisters in the truest sense. We would have died for each other. Almost did, several times. In August 1944, one of our nurses, Lieutenant Beatrice Chambers, collapsed while treating a patient. Just fell over, unconscious. We carried her to a bunk. She was burning with fever, delirious, barely breathing. Pneumonia. Without antibiotics, it was likely a death sentence. We took turns sitting with her, round the clock, keeping her cool when fever spiked, keeping her warm when she had chills, forcing fluids down her throat, praying constantly. I sat with her one night, third night of her illness. She was mumbling in her delirium, calling for her mother, asking why it was so dark, saying she was cold, so cold. I held her hand. "B, listen to me. You're not dying today. You hear me? We need you. Your patients need you. Your family needs you to come home. So you fight. You fight like hell. You're an American nurse. We don't quit." I don't know if she heard me, but somehow, impossibly, she turned the corner. The fever broke. She survived. Took her 2 months to recover strength enough to work again, but she made it. We all celebrated like it was Christmas. Small victories. That's what kept us going. Saving one life, getting one more day, finding one extra potato in the soup. These tiny victories were everything. The Japanese guards got meaner as the war turned against them. They must have known Japan was losing. The guards became more brutal, more arbitrary in their punishments, more likely to strike or shoot for minor infractions. One guard we called the Beast, we never learned his real name, took particular pleasure in tormenting us. He'd kick over our cooking pots, destroy medical supplies, beat internees for looking at him wrong. He was young, angry, cruel. In November 1944, he came to the hospital barracks, found me treating a patient, started screaming at me in Japanese, saying I was working too slowly, wasting medicine, being lazy. I kept my head down, kept working. Apologized in Japanese. He slapped me, hard enough to knock me off my feet. I tasted blood. My ear was ringing. "You lazy American pig," he screamed in broken English. "Work faster. Useless." I got up, bowed, apologized again. He raised his hand to hit me again. Captain Davison stepped between us. "She's doing her best. Our supplies are limited. We're working as fast as we can." He turned on her. For a moment, I thought he'd shoot her. His hand went to his pistol. Then another guard called him away, some duty he had to perform. He gave us one last glare, spat on the ground, and left. Captain Davison helped me up. My cheek was already swelling. "Thank you," I whispered. "We protect each other," she said simply. "Always." That was our code. We were nurses. We were Americans. We were sisters. We protected each other, no matter the cost. By late 1944, rumors started circulating. American forces had landed in Leyte. MacArthur had returned to the Philippines. The liberation was beginning. But would we survive long enough to see it? Every day was a struggle. Every day, someone else died. Every day, our bodies grew weaker, our supplies scarcer, our hope more fragile. I weighed 86 pounds. My hair had gone gray. I was only 37 years old, but I looked 70. My hands trembled. My vision was blurry from malnutrition. I had open sores that wouldn't heal. My body was shutting down, but my spirit wasn't broken, couldn't be broken. I was Ruby Bradley from West Virginia, mountain tough, Appalachian tough, Army Nurse Corps tough. I would survive this. We would survive this. And when liberation came, if it came, I would walk out of this camp on my own 2 feet, head held high, still a nurse, still an American, still undefeated. That was my promise to myself. That was my war. January 1945. The war was closing in. We could hear it. Distant artillery, aircraft engines, the rumble of battle getting closer every day. The Japanese knew it too. They became frantic, desperate, dangerous. Orders came down through the camp commandant. All able-bodied prisoners would be moved. Where? They wouldn't say. But we all knew what it meant. The Japanese were retreating, and they didn't want to leave witnesses behind. Mass executions had happened at other camps. We'd heard the stories, whispered rumors that chilled our blood. We prepared for the worst. I packed my few possessions, a small New Testament my mother had given me, a photograph of my family, a few medical instruments I'd managed to hide from the guards. If we were marching to our deaths, I'd face it as an American. But God had other plans. February 3rd, 1945. A day I'll remember until my last breath. I was in the hospital barracks, treating a patient with advanced beriberi. His legs were grotesquely swollen. His heart was failing. I was doing everything I could with nothing, knowing it probably wasn't enough. Then I heard it. A sound I hadn't heard in 3 years. American aircraft engines. Not high-altitude bombers, but low-flying fighters. The distinctive roar of American power. Everyone who could move rushed outside. We looked up at the gray sky, and there they were. Beautiful, deadly American planes with white stars on their wings, circling the camp. Someone started crying, then someone else, then all of us, crying and laughing and praying and thanking God. The planes made a low pass. We could see the pilots waving. They saw us. They knew we were here. Help was coming. The Japanese guards panicked. They started yelling, ordering us back inside. But for once, we didn't obey. We stood there in our rags, skeletal and weak, but unbowed, watching American aircraft own the sky above us. Freedom. It tasted like hope. The next hours were chaos. The Japanese guards received orders to evacuate immediately. They abandoned the camp in a rush, taking what they could carry, fleeing before American forces arrived. Some guards just disappeared into the jungle. Others formed up and marched out in formation, still military even in defeat. The beast, the cruel guard who tormented us, left without a word, just vanished. Part of me wanted to see him captured, tried, punished for his cruelty. But mostly, I was just glad he was gone. We waited. Hours passed. No guards, no soldiers, nobody. We were alone in the camp, for the first time in 3 years. Some internees wanted to leave immediately, walk down the mountain to find American forces. Captain Davison counseled patience. "We're too weak to walk far," she said, "and there might be Japanese stragglers out there. We stay put. They know we're here. They'll come." So we waited. Longest day of my life. Then, late afternoon, we heard vehicles. American vehicles. The sound of liberation. We rushed to the camp gates. Jeeps and trucks, flying the American flag, and soldiers, American soldiers, in clean uniforms with rifles and helmets, and the most beautiful sight I'd ever seen. The United States Army. The lead jeep stopped at the gates. An officer stepped out, a captain, young, healthy, well-fed. He looked at us, at our skeletal bodies and rags and the conditions of the camp. His face went pale. "Jesus Christ," he whispered, then louder. "You're safe now. You're safe. We're Americans. We're here to take you home." The camp erupted. People crying, cheering, praying, collapsing from emotion and relief. 3 years of captivity. 3 years of suffering. 3 years of wondering if we'd ever see home again. And now, here they were. Our boys, our army, America. I stood there unable to move, unable to process it. Was this real? Or was I delirious with fever again, hallucinating freedom? The captain walked over to me. "Ma'am, are you all right?" I tried to speak, couldn't, just nodded. "You're a nurse?" he asked, looking at the Red Cross armband I still wore. Filthy, faded, but still there. I found my voice. "Colonel Ruby Bradley, Army Nurse Corps." My voice was a rasp, barely recognizable as my own. He saluted. Actually saluted me. This healthy young captain saluting a skeleton in rags. "Ma'am, we need your help. We've got medics, but we need to assess everyone here, figure out who needs immediate evacuation. Can you help us?" Even then, even at liberation, even weighing 86 pounds with my body failing, they needed me to be a nurse. "Yes, sir," I said. "I can help." And I went to work. The evacuation took 3 days. The sickest internees went first, loaded onto trucks, driven to field hospitals, then flown to rear area medical facilities. The American medics were shocked by our condition. Malnutrition, untreated diseases, wounds that had never healed properly. We were medical disasters, every one of us, but we were alive. Against all odds, most of us had survived. Harold Peterson hadn't. Neither had dozens of others buried in that camp cemetery. We left them behind with promises to return, to give them proper burials, to bring them home eventually. It hurt to leave them, but we had no choice. I was evacuated on the second day. They wanted to evacuate me first. I was one of the worst cases medically. But I refused. My patients went first. I'd leave when my work was done. Classic nurse stubbornness. The Army doctors gave up arguing. Finally, on February 6th, I climbed into a truck with the last group of internees. Captain Davison was with me. We'd survive together. We'd leave together. The truck drove down the mountain, through Baguio, now controlled by American forces. Filipino civilians lined the streets, waving, cheering, crying. They'd suffered under Japanese occupation too. Our liberation was their liberation. We reached the field hospital, clean white tents with red crosses painted on top. American doctors and nurses bustling around, real medicine, real equipment, real food. It looked like heaven. They weighed me, 84 pounds. I'd lost another 2 pounds during liberation. The doctor examining me was a young lieutenant, couldn't have been more than 25. He looked at my chart, looked at me, and his eyes filled with tears. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "I don't know how you're alive. Your vital signs, your blood work, by all medical logic, you should be dead. What kept you going?" I thought about that, about 3 years of hell, about the patients I'd saved, about the nurses I'd served with, about promises made to dying men, about being an American. "Duty," I said simply. I had a duty to my patients, to my country, to myself. Couldn't quit while people needed me. He nodded slowly. "You're a hell of a nurse, Colonel Bradley. A hell of an American." They started treatment immediately. IV fluids, I'd been severely dehydrated for years. Vitamins for the beriberi and other deficiency diseases. Antibiotics for the infections riddling my body. Real food, gradually introduced so my starved digestive system wouldn't shut down. I spent 2 weeks in that field hospital. Slowly, painfully, my body began to recover. I gained 5 pounds, then 10. The shaking in my hands decreased. My vision cleared. Color returned to my skin. But recovery wasn't just physical. At night, I'd wake up screaming, back in the camp, guards beating me, patients dying in my arms. Captain Davison would come sit with me. She had the same nightmares. We'd sit together in the darkness, two nurses who'd been through hell, comforting each other. "We made it, Ruby," she'd say. "We're alive. We won." But winning didn't feel like I thought it would. I was alive, yes, but I was haunted, carrying the weight of the dead, remembering every face, every name, every person I couldn't save. The Army wanted to send me home immediately. Medical discharge. Full disability. They said I'd done enough, suffered enough, earned my rest. I refused. "I'm still a nurse," I told them. "Still Army. Still capable of serving. I'm not quitting." They argued. I was in no condition for active duty. I needed time to recover, to heal physically and mentally. Going home was the smart choice. But I'd spent 3 years watching people die because we didn't have enough nurses, enough medical care. The war in the Pacific was still raging. Soldiers were still fighting and dying. They needed nurses. They needed me. "I'm staying," I said firmly. "Find me a posting. I'll recover while I serve." They finally agreed, sent me to a hospital in Manila. Light duty, administrative work mostly, while I continued recovering. I gained more weight, up to 105 pounds by June 1945. Still thin, but functional. Then came August, the atomic bombs, Japan's surrender. The war was over. We'd won. America had won. The nightmare was finished. I stood in that Manila hospital, listening to the surrender announcement on the radio, and I wept. Not tears of joy, tears of exhaustion, relief, grief for everyone we'd lost, and gratitude that it was finally over. But my service wasn't over. They asked me to stay on, help with occupation duties, treat returning prisoners of war, assist with demobilization. I agreed. I spent another year in the Pacific, working, healing, serving, slowly becoming myself again, slowly learning to live without constant fear, constant hunger, constant death. In 1946, I finally went home to West Virginia. My family barely recognized me. I was still thin, still marked by the camp, still carrying invisible scars. But I was alive. I was home. I was still Ruby Bradley Army Nurse Corps, and my story wasn't over yet. I should have stayed home. That's what everyone told me. Rest, recover, retire. I was 39 years old, had survived hell, earned my peace. I could have left the Army with honors, lived quietly in West Virginia, put the war behind me. But I couldn't. Being a nurse wasn't what I did. It was who I was, and America still needed nurses. I stayed in the Army, took assignments stateside at first, Fort Bragg, Walter Reed, various military hospitals. Good work, important work, but something was missing. I wasn't challenged, wasn't on the edge where I belonged. Then came June 25th, 1950. North Korea invaded South Korea. War again. Different country, different enemy, same need for nurses on the front lines. I volunteered immediately. The Army tried to refuse. I was 43 years old now, still dealing with health issues from the prison camps, had given more than enough. Let younger nurses go to Korea. I wouldn't take no for an answer. I'd survived the Japanese camps. I knew how to function under impossible conditions. My experience was valuable, maybe invaluable. They needed me. Finally, they relented. Made me chief nurse at a mobile Army surgical hospital, a MASH unit. We'd set up near the front lines, provide emergency surgery and treatment for wounded soldiers, save lives that couldn't wait for evacuation to rear hospitals. I shipped out to Korea in November 1950, hit the ground running. Korea was different from the Philippines. Colder, brutally cold winters with temperatures dropping below zero, mountainous terrain, rapid advances and retreats as the front lines shifted dramatically, and casualties, waves of wounded young men, American and Allied forces, broken bodies needing immediate care. Our MASH unit was located near the front, moving as the battle lines moved. We worked out of tents, sometimes buildings if we were lucky, surgery around the clock, artillery fire close enough to rattle our equipment, occasional enemy probes near our position. It was chaos. But I thrived in chaos. I'd learned in the prison camps, you adapt, you improvise, you keep working no matter what. That's what I taught my nurses. Most of them were young, fresh out of nursing school, first time in a war zone. Terrified, overwhelmed, facing horrors they'd never imagined. I'd been there. I knew how they felt. Listen to me, I told them at our first staff meeting. You're going to see terrible things, men with injuries that will haunt your nightmares. You're going to lose patience despite your best efforts. You're going to question whether you can continue. They stared at me, wide-eyed. But here's what you need to know, I continued. You can do this. You're Army nurses. You're trained, capable, and strong. These soldiers need you. They're counting on you. So you're going to walk into that surgical tent, and you're going to save lives. You're going to be the difference between men going home to their families or dying on foreign soil. Understood? Yes, ma'am, they answered. And they were magnificent. Those young nurses worked themselves to exhaustion, mastered skills under fire, became some of the finest medical personnel I've ever served with. The Chinese entered the war in November 1950. Hundreds of thousands of troops pouring across the Yalu River. Our forces were pushed back in fierce fighting. Casualties flooded our MASH unit, more than we could handle, more than seemed humanly possible to treat. We performed surgeries for 36 hours straight. No sleep, barely time to eat, blood everywhere. Wounded men on every available surface, in the halls, outside in the cold waiting for treatment. We were drowning in casualties. I worked in triage, making the horrible decisions. Who could be saved? Who needed immediate surgery? Who was beyond help? Life and death choices made in seconds. No time for doubt, no time for grief. Just decisions and moving to the next patient. A young sergeant was brought in, barely 20 years old, from Ohio. Shrapnel had torn through his abdomen. He was conscious, in agony, begging for help. I examined him quickly. The damage was catastrophic. Even with immediate surgery, his chances were maybe 10%, and we had 20 other patients with better odds waiting. But he was awake, looking at me with terrified eyes, asking if he'd be okay. I couldn't tell him he was dying, couldn't take away hope. So I lied. "You're going to be fine, soldier. We'll get you into surgery soon. You're going to go home, see your family, live a long life." He smiled, relaxed a little. "Thank you, ma'am. I knew you'd fix me." I held his hand while a nurse gave him morphine. He slipped into unconsciousness. I moved to the next patient. He died an hour later. Never made it to surgery. I don't even remember his name. Too many patients, too much chaos. But I remember his face, his trust, his hope. I remember all their faces. By December, the situation was desperate. The Chinese offensive pushed us back. We had to evacuate our MASH unit, pack up everything, retreat south, all while treating patients who couldn't be moved. I stayed with the last group, made sure every patient who could be evacuated was evacuated, destroyed medical records so they wouldn't fall into enemy hands, prepared to defend patients who were too critical to move. Enemy forces were close. We could hear gunfire maybe a mile away. Our security detachment was nervous, ready to pull out. The officer in charge came to me. "Ma'am, we need to go. Now. Chinese forces are approaching." "I have 4 patients who can't be moved," I said calmly. "Critical condition. Moving them will kill them. Staying will get everyone killed. We have to go." I looked at my patients, young men who'd trusted us to care for them. I couldn't abandon them. "You go," I told him. "Take everyone who can travel. Leave me 2 nurses and 2 medics. We'll stay with the critical patients. Follow when they're stable enough to move." "Colonel, that's suicide." "That's being a nurse. Go. That's an order." He went, took most of the unit south, left me with 2 brave nurses, Lieutenants Sarah Mitchell and Dorothy Klein, and 2 even braver medics. We stayed with our 4 patients in an abandoned schoolhouse, Chinese forces approaching, no real weapons, no support, no backup plan. Craziest thing I'd ever done. And I'd done some crazy things. We worked through the night, stabilizing patients. Outside, we heard gunfire getting closer, vehicles moving, foreign voices, Chinese patrols searching the area. Lieutenant Mitchell was terrified. "Colonel, what do we do if they find us?" "We're medical personnel," I said, with more confidence than I felt. "Non-combatants. Geneva Convention protects us. Probably." "Probably?" "We'll be fine." I lied again. I'd survived Japanese prison camps. If captured again, I'd survive again. Probably. By dawn, our patients were stable enough to move. We loaded them onto a truck we'd hidden, drove south on back roads, evading Chinese patrols through sheer luck and prayers. Made it back to friendly lines by afternoon. The Army brass was furious, and impressed in equal measure. Furious that I'd risked lives. Impressed that we'd saved 4 patients who would have died otherwise. They put me in for a Bronze Star. I didn't want medals. I wanted my nurses recognized. Mitchell and Klein deserved awards for staying with me. They got them, bronze stars for both. That was Korea. Constant danger, impossible decisions, saving lives against absurd odds. I loved it. Sounds insane, but it was true. This was where I belonged, on the edge, under pressure, making a difference. I served in Korea until 1951, 18 months of war, thousands of patients treated, hundreds of lives saved, more awards and commendations than I knew what to do with. They promoted me to full colonel in 1951. At 44 years old, I was one of the most senior nurses in the Army. The brass wanted me stateside, training nurses, serving in administrative roles, using my experience to shape the next generation. I agreed. It was time. My body was worn out. Prison camps and Korea had taken their toll. I was exhausted, dealing with recurring health issues, not as sharp as I used to be. I spent the next 12 years in various stateside assignments: chief nurse at Walter Reed, instructor at the Army Medical Department, administrative roles at the Pentagon. Important work, but I missed the front lines, missed the intensity, the purpose, the feeling of directly saving lives. I retired in 1963, 56 years old, 30 years of service, 2 wars, more awards and decorations than I could count. The Army held a retirement ceremony. Generals gave speeches, called me a hero, a legend, an inspiration. I stood there in my dress uniform, chest covered with ribbons, and felt like a fraud. I wasn't a hero. I was just a nurse who'd done her job. Heroes were the soldiers who fought and died. Heroes were the nurses who stayed in those prison camps until they couldn't stand anymore. Heroes were the young men on operating tables, clinging to life with impossible courage. I was just Ruby Bradley from West Virginia, did what needed doing, nothing more. But the awards said differently. 2 Legion of Merit medals, Bronze Star, multiple campaign medals, and 34 decorations total, making me one of the most decorated women in American military history. I never sought recognition, never wanted fame, just wanted to serve, to heal, to do my duty as a nurse and an American. But if the medals and the recognition inspired other women to serve, to pursue nursing, to understand that women could be warriors too, then maybe they were worth something after all. Retirement should have been peaceful. A quiet house, garden to tend, grandnieces and grandnephews to spoil. I settled in West Virginia, back where I started, back to the mountains that made me strong. But I couldn't truly retire. Once a nurse, always a nurse. I volunteered at local hospitals, mentored young nursing students, spoke at veterans organizations, telling my story, keeping history alive. The younger generation needed to understand what war really was, what sacrifice meant, what their freedom cost. Over the years, reporters would find me, want interviews about the prison camps, about Korea, about being a woman in the military. I always agreed. Not for myself, but for the others. For the nurses who didn't make it home. For the soldiers who died on those operating tables. Their stories deserved to be told. What was the hardest part? A young reporter asked me once. This was in the 1980s, 40 years after the Philippines. I thought about that question. The starvation? The disease? The brutality? Watching patients die because we had no medicine? The hardest part, I said slowly, was coming home and realizing most people didn't understand, didn't want to understand. They'd say, "Thank you for your service," But they didn't really know what that service cost. The nightmares, the survivor's guilt, the weight of all those faces you couldn't save. "Do you regret it?" she asked. "Joining the military? Going through all that?" "Not for 1 second," I answered immediately. "I'm proud of my service, proud of what we accomplished, proud to have been an Army nurse. Would I want to go through it again? No. But I'd make the same choice tomorrow if I had to." The reunion with my fellow prisoner of war nurses happened every few years. We'd gather, those of us still alive, and remember. Not just the horrors, but the bonds we'd formed, the lives we'd saved, the strength we'd found in each other. Captain Maud Davison passed away in 1992. She'd been my rock, my friend, my sister in arms. I spoke at her funeral, told everyone there that she was the finest officer I'd ever served under, the bravest woman I'd ever known. One by one, the women I'd served with passed on. Lieutenant Mitchell from Korea, Lieutenant Klein, the young nurses from the Philippines whose names I carried in my heart. Each loss hit me hard. Each funeral reminded me I was running out of time to tell their stories. So I told them every chance I got. School assemblies, veterans groups, nursing conferences, television interviews when they asked. I wasn't comfortable with attention, but this was important. These stories had to survive. Young women would approach me after speeches, ask how I found courage, ask if they could be strong like that, ask what it took to serve. I'd tell them the truth. Courage isn't the absence of fear, it's acting despite fear. It's standing when everything tells you to run. It's doing your duty when it costs everything. And yes, you have that courage inside you. Every American does. Pray you never have to prove it. The awards kept coming, even in retirement. In 1982, the Army dedicated a building at Fort Sam Houston to me, the Ruby Bradley Building. I attended the ceremony, overwhelmed and embarrassed. Buildings should be named after people who did something really special, I thought. I'd just done my job. But the general giving the speech said something that stuck with me. Colonel Bradley represents the finest traditions of American military nursing: courage under fire, devotion to duty, selfless service. By honoring her, we honor every nurse who ever wore the uniform. Maybe that was the point. Maybe the building, the awards, the recognition, they weren't really about me. They were about every nurse, every woman, every person who served in the shadows, did the hard work, saved lives without seeking glory. I could accept that. My health declined in the 1990s. The prison camp years caught up with me. Lingering effects of malnutrition, tropical diseases, the stress of survival. My body had taken too much damage, survived too many things it shouldn't have. I spent my last years in a nursing home in West Virginia. Full circle, spending my final days being cared for by nurses, just as I'd spent my life caring for others. The young nurses there were wonderful, professional, compassionate. I was proud to be in their hands. Visitors still came, veterans wanting to meet me, students writing papers about women in the military, reporters asking for one more interview. I saw them all when I was able, told my stories, answered their questions, tried to pass on whatever wisdom I'd gained. "What's the most important lesson you learned?" a young nursing student asked me. This was in 2001, the year before I died. I was 94 years old, tired, ready for whatever came next. I thought about that. 67 years since I joined the Army. 57 years since liberation. a lifetime of memories, lessons, experiences. People are stronger than they think, I said finally. When everything is stripped away, comfort, safety, certainty, you find out what you're made of. And most people, if they have a reason to fight, will find strength they never knew existed. That's the human spirit. That's the American spirit. Never give up. Never surrender. Keep fighting until your last breath. I passed away on May 28th, 2002, 94 years old. Died peacefully in my sleep, surrounded by photos of family, friends, fellow nurses, the life I'd built from the ashes of war. They buried me with full military honors at Arlington National Cemetery. Horse-drawn caisson, flag-draped casket, 21-gun salute, taps echoing across those sacred hills where America's heroes rest. My gravestone is simple. Colonel Ruby Bradley, United States Army Nurse Corps, World War II and Korean War veteran. No mention of the awards, the decorations, the recognition, just my name, my rank, my service. That's how I wanted to be remembered. As a soldier, as a nurse, as an American who did her duty. But I hope my story means something more. I hope it tells you that ordinary people can do extraordinary things, that women are warriors, that courage comes in many forms, not just charging into battle, but standing your ground in a prison camp, performing surgery with no equipment, refusing to quit when your body is failing. I hope you understand that freedom isn't free. It's paid for in blood and sacrifice and suffering. 16 million Americans served in World War II. 405,000 never came home. Thousands more died in Korea, Vietnam, every conflict since. They believed in something bigger than themselves. They believed in America. Honor that belief. Live lives worthy of their sacrifice. Be good citizens. Stand up for what's right. Defend the weak. Oppose tyranny. Serve your communities. Make America, the America they died for, worthy of their faith. And if you're called to serve, whether in military, medicine, education, public service, whatever calling you find, answer that call. Give everything you have. Stand when others run. Be the person people can count on when everything goes wrong. That's what it means to be an American. That's what I tried to be for 30 years in uniform and 40 years after. That's my legacy. I was just a poor girl from West Virginia who wanted to help people. I became a prisoner of war who refused to break. I became a combat nurse who saved lives under impossible conditions. I became a colonel, a legend, one of the most decorated women in American military history. But most importantly, I remained Ruby Bradley, a nurse, an American. A woman who stood when she had to, fought when she needed to, and never, ever surrendered. That's my story. That's my truth. That's what I want you to remember. The Japanese tried to break me in those camps. They failed. Disease tried to kill me. I survived. War tried to destroy me. I endured. Because I was an American soldier, and we don't quit. Ever. I stood on burning tank destroyers like Audie Murphy. I held positions like the men at the Alamo. I survived death camps like thousands of other prisoners. I served in Korea alongside heroes whose names you'll never know. I lived the American promise that ordinary people, when called, will rise to meet any challenge. That promise still holds in you. In every American, the courage, the strength, the will to stand against darkness. It's there, waiting. Pray you never need it. But if that day comes, remember my story. Remember Ruby Bradley, the girl from West Virginia who weighed 86 pounds when liberated, but never lost her spirit. Remember that you're stronger than you think, tougher than you believe, capable of more than you imagine. Stand, fight, serve. That's the American way. I lived 94 years, survived 2 wars, earned 34 decorations, saved countless lives. But my greatest achievement? I never quit. I never surrendered. I remained faithful to my oath, my country, my calling. That's what I want on my tombstone. That's what I want in your hearts. God bless you all. God bless the United States Army, and God bless the United States of America. Duty, honor, country, always. Thank you for listening to my story. Please subscribe to this channel and share these stories with everyone you know. These memories must survive. The fallen must be remembered. The truth must be told to every generation.